Success as a musician is a horizon that is always expanding. You'll reach some milestones along the way in a given context, but that context will almost always expand. So for example, like you might start off local. You might be like, I want to become the best at my school. Great. Then when you get to be the best at the school, you're likely going to go, well, what about becoming the best in the region? And then when you become one of the best in the region, okay, well, what about at the national level? What about at the international level? So as you continue to hit these milestones, whether it becomes like center snare, or section leader, or first chair, or all-state, or whatever, it's going to continue to expand where you want to move into the next thing to progress. So that's a typical thing for many people to experience. It also expands so that you are trying to learn like harder instruments, or harder repertoire. So if you're a percussionist, you might be like, okay, well now I want to learn marimba. I've like mastered the snare drum. Now I want to learn this other thing. Although mastery is subjective and there's always more to improve. It might also be like, okay, well now I've worked on mallets, but now I want to work on timpani. So you can learn different instruments. Or I've gotten really good at this one particular piece on marimba. Now I want to learn a harder piece that is more challenging that'll push me in different ways. So even if you're like focusing on the same context and you're not comparing yourself to others, for your own playing, you might want to learn more difficult more difficult pieces to work on. And again, that's just kind of natural. It may never feel like what you have done is good enough when you're practicing because there's always more to learn, always more to improve. What I recommend doing is really focusing on learning to enjoy the process and avoid comparing yourself with others to try and prevent the burnout that so many musicians experience, especially when you're in the School of Music. And let's say you're an undergrad, you're comparing yourself with the master students and even some of the doctoral students, and you're looking at them and going, well, I'm not going to be able to get there. Well, you're not necessarily thinking about how they've had maybe a decade or more experience than you have performing the instrument. Like, yeah, you can totally get there. It's just going to take some time. So really focus on yourself and focus on the process of improving over time rather than comparing yourself to others. Before I get to the next tip, I just want to say really quickly that you can find literally thousands of hours of free drumming play-alongs and drumming tips in the link at the top of the description or by going into my home tab of YouTube. If you compare yourself with others, you will always miss out on some context that they have that you're not able to see through something like curriculum vitae or what you see on social media, wherever. You will likely vividly remember the failures that you've had that have led to the successes that you've already accomplished and whatnot in life. But you're only able to see the end result of other people's hard work without actually being able to see the many failures along the way that they experienced to get where they are right now. So for example, on my curriculum vitae, I have a bachelor's, master's, PhD, and my dissertation won the Outstanding Dissertation of the Year in 2018, which is the highest award you can possibly receive for the dissertation out of the entire field, so anyone in the world can compete for this. What you don't see is that it took me like 2.5 years just to write the proposal to be able to get to that point with that, and the number of like failed drafts that I had along the way to be able to eventually win that award. You'll see here that I have like over a dozen publications, and what you don't see are the different publications that were not accepted, that were denied, or the number of revisions that each one of these had. Some of these publications was like a multi-year process, like these book chapters and whatnot, on average for like 2 or 3 years from the first time sitting down to write the first word of it to the time it was actually published. It took multiple edits, multiple revisions, etc. You don't see any of those failures along the way. All you see on my CV is like, great, Jared has like a dozen or more publications on here, and you don't see all the failures. It's part of the process though. You'll see over 120 different presentations that I've done from the local level all the way up through the international level. And again, you don't see the ones that weren't accepted, and you don't see that some of these presentations didn't go well. I presented them and I was like, wow, I won't do it that way again, or wow, that did not resonate at all with the audience like I thought it would, etc. That's a normal part of the process, but you don't see any of that on here. All you see is, wow, that's a lot of presentation. Not all of them were home runs. Same thing for these grants. I've worked on multiple millions of dollars of grants, but I've been on more grant proposals that were denied than grants that actually succeeded. And having been a reviewer for the Department of Education at these grants, like most of the grants are denied because they just don't meet the qualifications, or they're not as good as some of the other applicants in there. Again, that's just a normal part of this process. I've won all these like honors and awards and whatnot as an educator, as a performer, as a scholar, but I've lost out on more than I've actually won. So while this looks fancy, it doesn't show the number of times times that I failed along this process. Same thing for like teaching all these like different classes, whether it's publicly or collegiately at university level, etc. You just don't see that on somebody's CV. So when you're looking at this and you're like, wow, like Jared's done a lot of things. You're like, yes, you're right, I have. I'm a bit obsessive, and I'm obsessive about my career and like learning and trying to help other people, but you don't see the number of failures on here. Like I can say from a marketing perspective, like advertise myself and be like, I'm a former center snare for high school, college, and for DCI. Wow, that sounds cool. Like section leader, center snare, etc. But you don't know the number of times I've been cut from drum lines. You don't know the number of times that I didn't make snare. I originally wanted to be a tenor player, didn't make that, etc. So like if you compare yourself with other people just by looking at this kind of stuff, it can do more harm than good in the long run because you don't see all those failures along the way, which are a part of the process. Another thing that a lot of people will do when they look at like drummers online is the drummers online who are sharing like a cover of something or like them playing like through a lick. It might have taken them 100 tries just to get that one like rep that sounds decent, and they'll share that one rep or ignoring all the 99 that came before it. And again, this is just a normal part of the process. So what you hear on the day-to-day is you are practicing and you're hearing your failures every single time you pick up your pair of sticks, and that's normal. I hope these like practice streams around like showing how I actually practice help normalize what it looks like to try and improve and to hear failures every single day when you're working on stuff. But try not to compare yourself to other people, and again, just focus on the process with your own learning, and that will help you out in the long run more so than looking at others. You can look at others for inspiration, but don't assume that there weren't failures along the way. Like I'm demonstrating in my CV, like there are more failures than there are successes on here. Just because this like CV is relatively long, the list of failures that I've had along the way to get here is significantly longer than the length of this particular CV. And that's not an exaggeration by any means. I've just been, in this career for a while. I often hear people talking about how you should strive for 1% improvement every single day. And that in the long run is going to set yourself up for failure, or it's just frankly going to be unrealistic for the expectations. So here's why. So for example, as a musician, progress as a musician is never going to be exponential or even linear. So what we expect is the more time I put into this, the more my skill is going to improve. Or if we go with like the 1%, poorly drawn here, exponential curve, it's like, okay, well, I'm getting 1% better, and then over time, continue to get better. If we go far enough along here, we can assume, okay, in an hour's worth of work, I could get a year's worth of progress. And that's just like not gonna happen. Like the amount of time that you put into this is actually going to look more like this over time. So the way that I actually like to think about this is it's more like carving a statue from stone than it is like just trying to strive for that 1% improvement where you get that exponential curve. So if you start with like a block of stone and you start like hitting off big chunks of it, slowly moving it, okay, I'm gonna like have the head up here and have the body down here, etc. You're gonna chop off the big chunks on it. Okay, you'll make a lot of progress initially, but eventually as you're continuing to refine it, you're eventually gonna be like, okay, I'm gonna use like a little bit of sanding right here and remove right there. Then it gets slowly a little bit better. You're just refining over time rather than making those exponential gains. Find ways to continue to make those little minor adjustments over time, or move on to another project if you start to hit that plateau when you are practicing whatever it is that you're practicing on. People would ask me, well, how did you get so good so fast? Good is relative. I would explain the things that I was willing to do, and they often were not willing to do that as well. The people who like you see on social media, there's like some young drummers that like play. I see a lot of comments like, wow, I wish I was that good when I was that age. And it's like, yes, but there's a lot of costs that come with that. For all of high school and like the majority of my undergrad, I was suicidal. Two things that kept me out of those thoughts was drumming and video games. Instead of thinking about my depression and the things that caused that suicidal ideation for nearly a decade, I drummed. I got better because I was practicing several hours a day, but that was at the cost of like the mental health struggles that I was going through. And that's something that's not often evident in the practicing and the results that you see from other people's practicing. So like some people would be envious of like, well, I wish that I could be as good as you. And it's like, okay, but do you know what the costs are for that? The number of relationships that have failed because of the amount of time that I've spent practicing rather than spent in relationships, etc. Like the balance was so skewed that I sacrificed everything to get better at some pretty severe costs that some people aren't willing to make. And like now there's like much more balance in my life with like a variety of things. Just to be candid with the stuff stuff that I wish more people talked about with drumming. Those are the important things that you need to consider as well. There's a lot of factors that go into what makes somebody good or not good over an extended period of time and whatnot. The biggest thing that I recommend for anyone is see a therapist. And if you find a therapist who's not helping, find a different therapist. So like I had a therapist and a psychiatrist back then because I had to go on antidepressants, but eventually I was able to get off the antidepressants because of the lifestyle changes I made with like eating healthier, getting proper sleep, working out more, etc. If I deviate from that path for an extended period of time, it starts to head back into that depression or that spiral. So I have to like constantly do efforts to make sure that I can prevent that. So like I have chronic depression, but I'm not depressed, if that makes sense. Like if I don't do the daily things that I know I need to do, like move and sleep and hydrate and all of those things, like meditate, then I will go back into the depressive state that my brain and body chemicals, etc., is kind of like wired to do. For anybody who's struggling through depression or anxiety or whatever, like a good therapist can literally change your life for the better. And it just takes effort over a period of time and things can get better.